Imagine this. You've just returned home after years of serving your country. All you want is a moment of peace, a quiet drink, a night to yourself. But not everyone sees you as you see yourself. The moment Jordan Tate stepped into that bar, eyes were already on him, judging, measuring, waiting for a reason to challenge him. Then came the laughter, the sneers, the disrespect, and when the tension reached its breaking point, Jordan had a choice: walk away or stand his ground. What happened next? No one saw coming. This isn't just a story about one man, it's about all of us. How do we react when we're challenged, when our worth is questioned, when respect is denied? Drop in the comments if you're ready for a story that will challenge your perspective, grip your emotions, and leave you thinking long after it ends. Hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that matter. Let's dive in. The glow of neon lights flickered against the humid Alabama night as Jordan Tate pulled his dusty old Ford into the gravel lot of Red Rock Tavern. The small roadside bar sat just off Route 29, a familiar haunt for long-haul truckers, locals, and weary travelers looking for a cold beer and a quiet place to unwind. Jordan had been back from deployment for a week, and all he wanted was a brief escape from the chaos of reintegrating into civilian life. With a deep breath, he stepped out of his truck, stretching his sore muscles. At 32, he carried himself with the ease of a man who had seen battle but never let it define him. His lean but muscular frame was wrapped in a faded army green hoodie over his desert camo pants. Instead of combat boots, he wore well-worn running shoes. His feet had had enough of military-issued gear for a lifetime. Pushing open the creaky wooden door, he was met with the low hum of conversation, the clatter of pool balls, and the distant twang of a George Strait song drifting from the jukebox. The bar smelled of aged wood, spilled beer, and fried food, a familiar, almost comforting scent. Jordan's dark eyes swept the room as he stepped inside. A few truckers hunched over their drinks, a couple of locals laughed at the bar, and a handful of loners nursed their beers in silence. No one paid him any mind. Just how he liked it. He made his way toward a corner table near the back, tucking himself into the dimly lit space. It offered a clear view of the entire bar, a habit he had picked up from years overseas. He ordered a glass of water, cradling it between his hands as his mind drifted. He thought of home, of his mother's famous gumbo simmering on the stove, of his little sister's voice, chattering away like she never ran out of words. That was what mattered now. Not war, not the past, just family. The moment of peace was shattered as the front door banged open. A group of 6 men strode in, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. They were older, rough-looking, their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias that marked them as veterans. Their voices were loud, brimming with arrogance as they clapped each other on the back and made their way toward the bar. Jordan barely spared them a glance, until he noticed that they weren't just looking at him. They were staring. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and sharp blue eyes, froze mid-laugh when he spotted Jordan. His expression darkened, and he muttered something under his breath. The rest of the group turned in unison, their conversation dying down as they all fixed their eyes on him. Jordan felt the weight of their gazes. He knew that look. He had seen it 100 times before, in different places, from different faces. A look that measured him, judged him, dismissed him before he even had a chance to speak. He didn't react. Instead, he sipped his water, shifting his focus back to the jukebox. The bikers huddled closer at the bar, their voices low but pointed. The leader, Jordan caught someone call him Rick, leaned in and whispered something, earning a harsh chuckle from one of his men. Jordan could feel the hostility creeping toward him like an approaching storm. The bar, which had been lively moments ago, began to quiet. The bartender, a wiry man in his late 50s, paused mid-pour, his eyes flickering between Jordan and the newcomers. The regulars picked up on the shift in energy, their conversations growing hushed as they stole cautious glances in his direction. Jordan remained still, his posture loose, his expression unreadable. But his instincts were awake, sharp as ever. Then the sound of boots against the floor, heavy, purposeful. They were coming toward him. Jordan exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his muscles coiled beneath his relaxed posture. He had been hoping for a quiet night. but it looked like fate had other plans. Jordan remained seated, his relaxed posture belying the sharp awareness coursing through his body. The leader of the bikers, Rick, halted just a few feet away, towering over the table. His voice was rough, gravelly, laced with a challenge. "Nice outfit you got there," he sneered, tilting his beer toward Jordan's camo pants. "What'd you do? Pick that up from a Halloween store?" Behind him, his crew chuckled, their laughter thick with mockery. Jordan met Rick's gaze, his expression unreadable. He'd dealt with worse, much worse. "It's mine," Jordan replied evenly. "Earned it." Rick raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Earned it, huh? That's funny, 'cause I've met plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. You looking for sympathy? Or maybe a free drink?" Jordan's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I don't need sympathy or free drinks, just here to enjoy my evening." Rick smirked and leaned in closer, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke invading Jordan's space. "You don't look like no soldier to me," he sneered. "Where's your boots? Your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." One of the men behind him snorted. "Bet he couldn't even tell us the first thing about basic training." Another chimed in. "Probably never seen a battlefield in his life." Laughter erupted again, jagged and grating against the low hum of the jukebox. Jordan let his eyes sweep over the men, sizing them up, not intimidated, but also not reckless enough to engage unnecessarily. Years in the service had taught him that battles weren't always fought with fists or weapons. Sometimes the right response was silence. But something about this encounter gnawed at him. It wasn't just their ignorance. It was their audacity. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Jordan said finally, his voice calm but firm. Rick's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he leaned in further, his large frame looming over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero, walking in here like you belong?" His voice dropped lower, more menacing. "I don't think you do." The room seemed to hold its breath. Jordan remained still, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his words measured, but carrying an undeniable weight. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said. "I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." The laughter died instantly. A flicker of hesitation crossed Rick's face, but pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he scoffed. "Yeah, prove it. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're nothing but a liar." Jordan's gaze flicked to the others in the group. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, their leader's bravado now making them uneasy. They weren't so sure anymore, but none of them spoke up. Jordan exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to escalate. "I don't owe you proof," he said evenly. "But if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone, ready to call for help. Other patrons shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Jordan and the group, sensing how quickly things could spiral out of control. And yet, Rick didn't back off. Instead, his smirk returned, sharper, meaner than before. "You got a smart mouth," he muttered, his voice dangerously low. "Let's see if it's as quick as your fists." The moment hung in the air, stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. Then, Rick lunged. His hand shot forward, aiming for Jordan's collar. But his movement was clumsy, driven more by alcohol and bravado than any real skill. Jordan didn't think. He reacted. Years of training kicked in. With a swift, precise motion, he sidestepped the grab, catching Rick's wrist midair. Before the man could process what was happening, Jordan twisted his arm behind his back in one fluid movement, using his weight to push him forward, pinning him face first against the table. A strangled yelp of pain escaped Rick's lips. His earlier bravado evaporated in an instant. The bar erupted in gasps and murmurs. The rest of the bikers froze, their wide-eyed stares fixed on their immobilized leader. For a moment, no one moved. Jordan's voice cut through the stunned silence, low and controlled, carrying an unmistakable authority. "I told you to think twice before starting something," he said, his grip firm but not excessive. "You don't know who you're messing with." Rick struggled against the hold, but it was useless. Jordan's years of discipline left no room for error or escape. One of the bikers took a hesitant step forward, hands raised in a half-hearted attempt to intervene. "Hey man," he stammered. "Let him go. He didn't mean nothing by it." Jordan glanced up, locking eyes with him. "He came at me," he said, his voice steady. You saw it. The man hesitated, then nodded. Let's pause here for a moment. If you were in Jordan's position, what would you have done? Staying calm under pressure isn't easy, especially when someone challenges your identity and integrity. But here's the truth. How we react in moments like these defines us. Would you have stayed quiet, walked away, or stood your ground? This scene is more than just a confrontation in a bar. It reflects real-life struggles. People judge others based on appearances, on preconceived notions. But respect isn't given. It's earned. Have you ever faced a situation where someone doubted your worth? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Back to the story. The bartender, who had been silently watching, finally spoke up. Maybe it's time for you all to leave, he said, his voice firm. Before this gets worse. Rick, still pinned against the table, gritted his teeth. Call the cops, he growled. This guy just assaulted me, and he's wearing a fake uniform. I want him arrested. Jordan released him with a controlled shove, and Rick stumbled forward, clutching his arm. He turned, glaring daggers at Jordan. You'll pay for this, he snarled. The rest of the bikers rallied behind him, one of them already pulling out a phone. Yeah, we got a guy here impersonating a soldier, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And he just attacked my friend. Jordan stood still, his expression calm, but his mind was already racing. He knew how this looked, and he knew how fast things could spiral. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the tense air. The bartender's voice cut through the tense silence. I saw it. Hank went after him first. A murmur rippled through the bar as more patrons nodded in agreement. A trucker sitting near the jukebox added, Yeah, that soldier didn't start anything. Hank's been looking for trouble since he walked in. The two officers exchanged glances. The female officer, whose name tag read Senator Rollins, turned back to Jordan. Sir, do you have proof of service? Jordan, still calm despite the weight of the moment, gestured toward his duffel bag near his chair. In there. My uniform, my ID. Officer Rollins picked up the bag, unzipped it, and carefully removed a neatly folded service uniform adorned with his name and rank. She held it up briefly, inspecting the insignia before passing it to her partner, Officer Delgado. He studied the name patch, then looked back at Jordan with a nod. This checks out, Delgado said, his tone professional. Sergeant Jordan Tate, U.S. Army. A flicker of satisfaction passed over Jordan's face, but he remained silent. Hank, still cradling his twisted arms, sneered. So what? Maybe it's real, but that doesn't mean it belongs to him. His voice carried a desperate edge, grasping at the last straws of his wounded pride. He could have stolen it. Officer Rollins gave him a sharp look. You sure you want to make that accusation? Hank faltered, but his anger wouldn't let him back down. Jordan exhaled slowly, his patience thinning. He met Hank's gaze with unwavering steadiness. You want more proof? He reached into his pocket, pulled out his military ID, and held it out. Rollins took it, examined the card carefully, then showed it to Delgado. Everything matches, she confirmed. Sergeant Tate isn't impersonating anyone. A heavy silence settled over the room. Hank clenched his jaw, his face red with humiliation. His crew shifted awkwardly, realizing their leader had lost this fight. The power dynamic had shifted, and the tension was no longer in Jordan's hands. It was in Hank's. You're lucky, Hank muttered, voice low and bitter. Real lucky. Jordan let out a humorless chuckle. Lucky? He shook his head, his voice edged with steel. I've been shot at in the desert, watched friends bleed out on the battlefield, and spent months wondering if I'd make it home. You think this is what lucky looks like? Hank's expression flickered, just for a second, as if a crack had formed in his certainty. But he recovered quickly, scoffing under his breath. Rollins took a step forward, her presence commanding. Hank, you called us here claiming an assault and impersonation of a soldier. You lied. I didn't lie, Hank snapped. He did attack me. You initiated physical contact, Delgado corrected, his voice firm. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. That means you could be looking at assault charges. Hank's jaw tensed. He glanced at his crew for backup, but none of them spoke. One of them, the wiry guy named Bill, actually took a step back. Fine, Hank grumbled. Let's just drop it. Rollins raised an eyebrow. Drop it? She turned to Jordan. Sergeant Tate, do you want to press charges? Jordan studied Hank. The man stood there, shoulders squared, fists clenched, too proud to apologize, too stubborn to admit defeat. The old Jordan, the soldier who had spent years fighting battles overseas, might have said yes, might have taken the opportunity to make an example out of him. But this wasn't a battlefield. And Hank? He wasn't the real enemy. Jordan took a breath. No. Hank's head snapped up in surprise. Jordan met his gaze and said simply, "Not worth my time." The words stung worse than a punch. Hank's face twisted, as if he wanted to lash out again, but Rollins wasn't about to give him the chance. "We're done here," she declared. "Hank, get your boys and get out." For a moment, Hank didn't move. Then, with a grunt, he turned and stormed toward the exit. His crew hesitated before following, Bill lingering just a second longer before slipping out behind them. As the door swung shut, the tension in the room finally eased. Conversations started back up, the jukebox continued playing, and the bartender went back to pouring drinks. Jordan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. He looked at Rollins and Delgado. "Thanks." Rollins nodded. "We were just doing our job. But between us—" She gave him a knowing look. "You handled yourself well." Delgado smirked. "Damn well, if you ask me." Jordan chuckled, picking up his duffel bag. "I should go." As he turned to leave, the bartender called out, "Hey, soldier." Jordan looked over his shoulder. The bartender lifted a glass. "Next round's on me." Jordan gave a small, appreciative nod. "Thanks. Maybe next time." With that, he pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The Alabama air was cool against his skin as he walked to his truck, the last remnants of tension rolling off his shoulders. He had come here for a quiet night. He hadn't gotten one, but at least he had left with his dignity intact. Jordan studied Bill, his expression unreadable. The man looked out of place standing in his driveway, shuffling his feet like a kid caught doing something wrong. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, the heat of the Alabama summer still clinging to the air. "You're sorry?" Jordan finally said, his voice even. He didn't say it with anger, but with the weight of a man who had heard empty apologies before. Bill nodded, stuffing his hands deeper into the pockets of his leather jacket. "Yeah, I know it don't mean much, but I needed to say it." Jordan leaned against his truck, crossing his arms. "Why now?" Bill hesitated, then exhaled heavily. "Look, I ain't proud of what happened that night. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, and I went along with it. I shouldn't have." Jordan studied him for a long moment. "But you did." Bill's jaw tensed. "Yeah, I did." Silence stretched between them. A light breeze stirred the dust along the driveway. Then Bill spoke again. "Truth is, my dad was in the army, served in Desert Storm. I grew up hearing his stories about how much he loved the guys he fought with. He always said it wasn't about race or background, it was about trust, about knowing the guy next to you had your back no matter what." He glanced down, as if ashamed. "And yet there I was, standing with Hank while he spat all that garbage at you. I guess I wasn't thinking about what my old man would have said." Jordan let the words settle. He'd spent years in the military, fighting alongside men and women of every background. Out there, in the heat of battle, the only thing that mattered was whether you could trust the person beside you. But back home, it was different. Prejudices ran deep, sometimes even among those who claimed to respect the uniform. Bill shifted uncomfortably. "I ain't saying this to make myself feel better. I wanted you to know that I see it now. And I was wrong." Jordan sighed, wiping his hands on the rag still slung over his shoulder. "Hank still running his mouth?" Bill let out a dry chuckle. "Nah. Ever since that night, he's been licking his wounds. But I think deep down, he knows he lost more than just a fight." He hesitated. "Some of the guys ain't been showing up to ride with him as much. Not after seeing how he handled things." Jordan smirked slightly. "Guess actions have consequences." "Yeah," Bill muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess they do." Another silence settled between them, but this time it wasn't as heavy. Bill took a breath. "I should get going. Just wanted to say my piece." He turned toward his bike but hesitated. "For what it's worth, I meant it when I said I was sorry." Jordan watched him for a moment before nodding. "All right." Bill nodded back, then climbed onto his motorcycle. The engine rumbled to life, and with one last glance he pulled away, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Jordan stood there for a while, watching the empty road long after Bill had gone. The past week had been a reminder. Some battles didn't happen on the front lines. They happened in everyday moments, in bars, on street corners, in the spaces where understanding and ignorance collided. He wasn't naive. He knew there would always be people like Hank, men who clung to their hate like a lifeline, unwilling to change. But there were also people like Bill, people who, given the chance, could see the truth for what it was. Jordan exhaled, rolling his shoulders before turning back to his truck. There was work to be done, and he had no intention of dwelling on the past. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, he tightened the last bolt under the hood and wiped his hands clean. The world kept moving forward, and so would he. The next morning, Jordan sat on his porch, a fresh cup of coffee warming his hands as he watched the sun rise over the Alabama horizon. The encounter with Bill lingered in his mind, not in a way that unsettled him, but in a way that made him think. Bill wasn't the first man Jordan had met who had followed the wrong crowd, nor would he be the last. But the fact that he had the courage to come forward, to own his mistakes, meant something. Not everyone had the ability to recognize their faults, let alone face them. Jordan took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the morning quiet settle around him. The cicadas had already begun their steady hum, and the smell of fresh dew hung in the air. It was peaceful, far from the tension of the bar, far from the battlefields overseas. For the first time in a long while, he felt something close to relief. Later that day, Jordan drove into town for supplies. As he walked into a hardware store, he noticed a familiar face near the counter. The bartender from Red Rock Tavern. The older man spotted him and gave a nod. "Sergeant." Jordan nodded back. "How's the bar?" The bartender smirked. "Quieter now that Hank ain't been showing up." He leaned on the counter. "Word travels fast in a small town. A few of the regulars saw how you handled yourself. Let's just say you earned a little more respect around here." Jordan chuckled lightly. "I wasn't looking for that." "I know," the bartender said. "That's why you got it." There was an understanding between them, one that didn't need many words. Jordan picked up the supplies he came for, and before leaving, the bartender called out, "If you ever need a drink, you know where to go." Jordan nodded, appreciating the gesture. A week passed. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Jordan spent his days working on his truck, tending to his small home, and slowly settling back into civilian life. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over his yard, he heard the distant rumble of motorcycles. He tensed instinctively, but as the sound grew closer, he recognized the lead bike. Bill. This time, he wasn't alone. A few other bikers trailed behind him, but none of them had the same air of hostility as before. Bill pulled up near the driveway, cutting his engine. The others followed suit. Jordan stood from his porch, watching them carefully. Bill climbed off his bike, taking a hesitant step forward. "We're not here for trouble," he said quickly. Jordan crossed his arms. "Then why are you here?" Bill exhaled. "Some of the guys, they've been thinking about what happened, about what we almost got caught up in. And, well, we wanted to make things right." Jordan studied them. These were the same men who had stood beside Hank that night. But now, there was no mockery in their eyes, no arrogance in their posture, just something that almost looked like respect. "We can't change what happened," Bill continued, "but we can do better." Jordan let a moment pass, then nodded. "Then do better." Bill gave a small, almost grateful nod before turning back to his bike. The others followed, engines roaring to life, but before he left, he glanced back. "See you around, Jordan." With that, they rode off, disappearing into the fading light. Jordan stood there for a long moment, then turned back toward his house. Sometimes battles weren't fought with fists or weapons. Sometimes they were fought in moments of understanding, in the choices people made after the dust had settled. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, Jordan felt like maybe, just maybe, this was a battle he had won. Dear friends, so that's it. Jordan didn't just win a fight, he won something far greater. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned through actions, through integrity, through knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away. This story isn't just about a soldier in a bar, it's about all of us. How often do we judge without understanding? How often do we let our pride keep us from growth? And most importantly, when faced with ignorance, do we fight fire with fire? Or do we rise above it? What would you have done in Jordan's place? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between retaliation and wisdom? Let's talk about it in the comments. If this story spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and inspire change. Your voice matters, so let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and always stand for what's right.